Congratulations on making it to the end of the day. I'll try to wrap it up on a positive note. I am talking tonight about the overlapping intersection between sound money and high culture, periods of human flourishing that relate to different times in human history where money has worked well. And as I've learned more about Bitcoin, I've become more and more interested in different times in human history where money worked well and what the outcome of that was. I've learned that there is no such thing as continuous, uninterrupted progress. There is no such thing as up only. There is every process that occurs in nature is cycles. Things that have to do with seasons or death and rebirth. And human civilization and culture is the same. These rules apply to the advancement of human civilization in the same way. And this is why I feel that what's really going on with Bitcoin right now is a transition towards a new period of high culture in human civilization, the golden age of reason. Bitcoiners, we love this chart. Everyone loves to study the history of monetary events in the recent American history. We have what happened in 1971, the Bretton Woods event, the 6102 confiscation of gold, and of course the hatching of the creature from Jekyll Island, the Federal Reserve Bank created in 1913. Everyone who attends Bitcoin events understands fractional reserve banking and the disastrous effects of inflation and currency debasement. And what I think we could spend more time thinking about is the period in human history that actually came just before all this happened, which is referred to by historians as the long 19th century. This is a time in history that started in 1789 with the French Revolution, which ironically or unironically had a lot to do with taxation and the rising cost of living, and ended with the outbreak of World War I in 1913. The long 19th century was a period of prosperity, of extended high culture, great art and symphonies, a boom of inventions, the light bulb, the steam engine, the electricity. We were developing things at a record pace, and it was a time where, for the most part, money worked very well, much better than we are used to, or than the time period that we study or spend a lot of time talking about. This is a chart of the performance of the purchasing power of the US dollar during this time period, and between 1776 and 1913, the price index in America went up only 20% during that entire time. It's a very similar story in Britain over a slightly longer period from 1750 to 1913, sort of fueled by the productivity gains of the Industrial Revolution. The average rate of inflation in Britain during that time was 0.6% for the entire lifetime of that period. And across Europe, there's lots of data about prices, and this is the CPI history of Europe from 1750 to 1938. Prices did roughly a 3x, and in the 80 years that followed, prices went up 40x. So money obviously was working one way, and something changed. Money started to work very differently, and it's almost as though before 1920, people didn't even know the word inflation. There's almost no record of the word inflation appearing in literature. Nobody was talking about this concept. What's fascinated me about the long 19th century are the beautiful masterworks, buildings that have survived from that period and are literally all over the world. The long 19th century was a period of a global monoculture where the architecture was this sort of beauty and prosperity and a real celebration of craftsmanship. And so this style is really right in front of us, and it's everywhere in the world. This is the Hungarian Parliament in Budapest. This is the legislature building in Edmonton, Canada, where I'm from. This is the Victor Emmanuel Monument in Rome, which is so stunning. It's almost hard to believe that it was built by the same civilization that we live in now. This is from an area of Chicago that was called the White City, which looks like it was in Rome, but was tragically destroyed after the World's Fair in 1893. This is the Victoria Monument in Kolkata, India. And this is the State Capitol building in Iowa. And this building has always fascinated me because when this building was built, there were hardly 100,000 people living in the entire state of Iowa. And in spite of that, they felt it was important to build a building this grand. It's really, something very significant about a decision like this. These buildings would have taken 10, 15, 20 years to build. It's a big commitment, and the resources and time. And this is the same building, a photograph that was taken sort of 60 years later in the 1930s, and what we can see here is almost like a before and after of central banking. Because the buildings in the foreground now, the contemporary buildings, or you could say the temporary buildings that were built with the fiat money paradigm. You can see the materials that they had to use and the difference in the quality. They were talking about a building that was designed to last forever, now being really designed or surrounded by these disposable buildings. And I think about there's the decision to make buildings that would have taken this long. Obviously, it becomes more and more difficult as money starts to work less and less well. Money doing its job is, the most important benefit of money performing its duties is that it provides us the ability to plan for the future with certainty. When money works, we can think with a long time horizon in terms of how we make decisions. And as money gets more and more wonky, it gets harder and harder to think long term. And so if we were thinking about a 15-year construction time horizon in the way money works now, well, this is what the cost of lumber has done over the last 20 years. So if someone was thinking about a large-scale construction project that was going to take 15 years and they started at the bottom, they would have potentially seen a 900% increase in the input costs of the project during the life of the time they were building the building. So it's obvious to see why we don't do this anymore. And this is the chart that shows the cost of concrete over the last 100 years. And it's the same problem, just sort of visualized in a slightly different way. I think about value as being some combination of energy and time. And this is why I think these buildings are such a fascinating record of snapshots of how money worked and how society understood how money was working. Because if you think about a building, the energy would be the material costs and the labor, as well, and then the time that it takes to make the building. So in this case, energy and time go in, and a building comes out. And at the end of this process, what you have really with buildings is a time-stamped indication of how much energy and time was required to create a building of a certain quality in that exact period of time. So we really can look at buildings and compare buildings from different periods of time and have a great understanding of how societies building those buildings would have been thinking about the future. and how they would have been thinking about the now. So I think that how we think about money in terms of the relationship it has between energy and time is just so important. And the buildings are a really easy way for us to understand. And so I think that we often talk about money fulfilling this role as being a store of value. But if value is a combination of energy and time, then it's appropriate to be thinking about money working properly in terms of its ability to store time. And what are we trying to do when we're earning money is we are really trying to transmute our energy and time into something so that we can turn it back into something else for our own consumption or needs at a future date. This is really what we're trying to do. And so when we think about money fulfilling its duties poorly, it's really robbing us of our ability to store our time. And so I also think it's appropriate to think of inflation as being the theft of time. So I think this concept of the theft of time can be thought about in a few ways. It applies both backwardly to the time that we've already spent, the time that we're trying to store, and it also applies forwardly to the time that we haven't spent yet. Because if we continually have to spend more and more of our time to accomplish the same things we would have at a previous time when money was storing time more effectively, then that is the theft of our future time. And so this concept of inflation stealing our time is something that applies to individuals, and societies really are the sum of individuals. And so the theft of time absolutely applies to societies in the same way that it applies to each of us. And so I think if we come back to visualizing the theft of time at a social level, the buildings give us a breadcrumb trail to understand over periods, over extended periods, the disastrous effects. So we think about inflation as being the confiscation of purchasing power. But if we think of it instead as being a 2% target rate confiscation of our ambitions or our standards or our hopes, well, it's just like money, where 2% a year over 1 or 2 years, it's a very difficult thing to understand. But over 50 years or 100 years, you can really see it. And if you just use the building standard instead of money, it becomes really obvious to see what kind of a social change this is affecting over longer periods of time. And it is absolutely true to say that in the long 19th century, when money worked better, we were building things to a totally different standard with totally different ambitions. In the long 19th century, every detail mattered. Everything was built to uplift and to inspire. Everything was built to endure. Even the drain pipes had to be beautiful in the long 19th century. And today, we build things that are disposable and things that are meant to be forgettable. And this is not an insignificant change. This is a fundamental shift in how we think about the world that we live in. These are exteriors that are really commonplace. This is indicative of the construction, of the kinds of craftsmanship. And, you think about this stuff would have been like done by hand. So the commitment to create buildings that look like this, it really says something about the people who are living in this society. And the interior of these spaces is often just as fabulous. It's a mind-blowing scale and commitment to every single thing being meant to inspire and uplift. And so when I think about this 2% annual confiscation of our optimism and of our hope, then I wonder, what is the long-term social impact of us existing in this society that is changing right in front of us. And the buildings, again, are a breadcrumb trail to help us understand what money is doing to our cultures and what it's doing to our ability to interact with each other. The world we live in is this co-creation. It is a collective realization of how we dream and imagine the world that we want to live in. It's like we're all sort of living in our shared instance of Minecraft. So we get to produce and build these environments. We are products of these environments that we live in, but the environments are products of us. So we are absolutely intimately connected to the spaces that we decide to create, and we don't build spaces that look like this anymore. Today, the world is, I think, the spaces that we build, it's safer to say, are more of a reflection of this, of the dichotomy between the new and the old, the things that are meant to be shiny and then what we have left behind. This is one of my favorite quotes from Goethe, and if it's true that architecture is the solid state of music, then I think we can look at the buildings we build and we can see that the songs that we hear in our head are changing. They're getting worse. This is something that is stuck with me for a long time. I think that the challenge for us is that we very quickly get amnesia as these beautiful buildings are sort of dulled down or made ugly and removed entirely. All of a sudden we forget, and it's very difficult for us to keep track of what's been taken from us. I think that because it happens over just a slightly long enough period of time that it's hard for an individual person to track. This is why the effects can compound over time and be so stunning. And today, this is the global architectural monoculture. Everything that we make today is made of cardboard and plastic, and it's sterile, disposable, generic. We don't care anymore about the small things being designed to uplift, and it shows. And it's not hard to understand why. The tax situation just about everywhere in the world today is not that different from the circumstances in France that led to the French Revolution and kicked off the long 19th century in the first place. Our ancestors rode donkeys and built these structures with hammer and chisel. No power tools, no diesel engine, no crane. So if you can imagine the will, the collective desire to create these awe-inspiring spaces, what it would have meant to them to do this or to even dream it. And that's what makes me think of like how far we have drifted away from those times. And if you've ever been to a space like this, it's hard to imagine the beauty, and they're truly awe-inspiring. And today, this is what we call the first world. This is our vision of the pinnacle of human civilization. We have convinced ourselves, because we are living in a time of immense technological innovation, that this is a period of cultural high. And I think this is where we've made a mistake. And this is where Bitcoin comes in. Because Bitcoin literally is energy and time. When you mine Bitcoin, the inputs are energy and time. Energy and time go in, Bitcoin comes out. Bitcoin is energy and time. Bitcoin represents energy and time. Bitcoin stores energy and time. And most importantly, Bitcoin gives everyone back their energy and time. So I can't help but wonder where this is going, and it's not about fixing the money, it's about how it will change the world that we live in. And I wonder what happens when everyone has been given back their energy and time, and their hope, and their optimism, and their standards, and their ambitions. And if all of a sudden, everyone had the time to think and to really dream. If we were able to really translate all of the technological innovation of the modern era into a genuine abundance for everyone, what kind of spaces would we start to build? And what kind of a world would we collectively will into reality? This is a world where we can plan for the future with optimism, because when money works, we can plan for the future with certainty. And this is where I think the most exciting thing that we don't spend enough time thinking about is how will the world around us transform when we have given everyone back their hope for a brighter tomorrow. And this is what I believe Bitcoin is all about. And I believe that the world around us has already started to change. And what we will see as the money is fixed on its own is a physically different world than the one we have lived in our lives. The 20th century is going to disappear, and it will be replaced by something truly beautiful and inspiring, because I believe that the intrinsic default setting of the human spirit is hope. We are hardwired for hope, because that is the only reason anyone would want to have kids. You want to believe that you're going to pass on a brighter tomorrow for the next generation that's coming behind us. And so that's inside all of us. And the missing piece is what happened in 1913. And so what I hope we'll see next is a return of the time that happened just before 1913, of innovation and art and beautiful buildings and beauty just in general. And this is what I think is the golden age of reason, the second Renaissance. And we're all here to see it together. So thank you for coming to see my talk.